Oppenheimer is like, I don't know about this, dude. And Truman's like, I do. We're doing it. We're doing it. Let's go. Let's go. 2 months after Oppenheimer had finished it, he wanted to use it. Like, he had no idea how impactful this would actually be. What a joke. And he wasn't even supposed to be the president. He wasn't supposed to be the vice president. He wasn't supposed to be a senator. Apparently, according to his mom, he was supposed to be a girl. That wasn't okay. That might have been a little too far, Sid. It might have been a little too far. But you know what? So is dropping an atomic bomb. That's far as well. Jeez. Hey, how you doing? Hey, how you doing? Hey, how you doing? Hey, how you doing? I'm fine, thank you for asking. I apologize in advance if my voice sounds weird or different. I have a cold, but I'm not gonna let that get me down. Not gonna let that stop my shine. Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to my channel. Today's video, we're going to be doing another makeup and history. If you're new here, my name is Cydnee, and Makeup and History is a series on my channel where I put on makeup while talking about a historical event, a scandal from the past, or just a person that fascinates me. In my last upload, we talked about the legendary Josephine Baker, goddess. Love that woman, love her. Never met her, love her to death. For today's video, we're going to be talking about Harry Truman, specifically the end of World War II, and basically how Harry Truman was not supposed to be the president. I got the idea to do this topic because I don't watch the news anymore, but I've heard that Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, the president of Russia, what do they have in Russia? Leaders, presidents, dictators, what is it? Sorry. Anyways, I heard Vladimir Putin might use nuclear weapons, and I was like, that's insane. And then it got me thinking about the last time that happened. And then it got me thinking about when I learned that Harry Truman was never supposed to be the president. Not just because Roosevelt died. He wasn't even supposed to be the vice president. He wasn't even supposed to be a senator. So he became a senator, and then the vice president, and then the president, and then dropped the deadliest weapon known to mankind. It's a mess, but it's a fascinating story, and if you haven't heard it yet, buckle up, baby. If you haven't already and you would like to, please subscribe to my channel, join the family, turn on the notification bell so that you're notified every single time I upload. All right, let's get into it. All of the products and everything that I'm using will be listed down in the description box as usual if you're curious. I also cite my sources down in the description box, so if you're ever curious where I'm getting my information, go ahead and check on in there. Majority of the information that I got for this video is from a docuseries called The Untold History of the United States. I watched it a couple years ago on Netflix, and they've since taken it down, I think because the contract expired. So you have to purchase it if you want to watch the whole thing, which I highly recommend. It's so good. So we'll start this story at the end of 1943, probably the height of World War II. The world is in literal shambles. It's chaos everywhere. Across the Atlantic Ocean, Germany and the Nazis have pretty much taken over every country in Europe. And then across the Pacific Ocean, Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor, and they were also terrorizing most of the countries in Asia. They were just as bad as the Nazis, and they were allies. So they weren't technically working together, but they were supporting each other. Franklin Roosevelt, who was the president of the US at the time, declared a policy of unconditional surrender, which meant he was going to do whatever it took at all costs to stop both of the militaries on both ends. The US was actively at war with Japan, but they were having a hard time because they had to cross the Pacific Ocean in order to get to them. So Roosevelt thought it would be a good idea to ask Joseph Stalin, who was the leader of the Soviet Union, now Russia, to help. Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union was actively at war with Germany and the Nazis, and they were kicking their ass, okay? They were really getting in there. In fact, Stalin and the Soviet Union were Europe's last hope. Like, Germany had conquered all of the countries. They were occupying, I don't want to say all, because I don't know that to be true, but most of them, majority of them, the big ones. The only one that they hadn't gotten yet was the UK, and that's because it's an island, so it was harder to get to. But Russia, as soon as they tried to go into Russia, they got met with that action, and they weren't ready for it. So Stalin was pretty much their only hope, and he was winning. So Roosevelt asked, hey, like, when you're done whooping Germany's ass, would you mind helping me whoop Japan's ass? Because if we can come in from that way, then it'd be better than us having to come across the ocean, you know? Stalin agrees to help the US, mainly because he really liked Roosevelt. He didn't like very many people, but he and Roosevelt had a really good relationship. So he agreed that he would help the US defeat Japan once he defeated Germany, and in return, the US was going to give aid to the Soviet Union because they were already losing so much fighting the war. So Joseph Stalin and Franklin Roosevelt had a pretty good relationship. They were bros. Like, they got along really well. Stalin had a really good reputation in the US as well. Like, he was named Man of the Year by Time magazine in 1942. People really supported him because he was defeating the Nazis. I guess. I don't know. I wasn't there. Other world leaders like Winston Churchill didn't like the arrangement that Joseph Stalin and Franklin Roosevelt had made. Joseph Stalin and Winston Churchill had like a known beef. Like, they did not like each other at all. And Roosevelt was like the mediator between the two of them. Like, he was the one keeping everyone together, basically, trying to save the world. So in late 1943, the three of them had a conference and they agreed on the plan, and this was called the Yalta Agreement. Now, the US had also been secretly working on a very top secret confidential project, is what they called it, the Manhattan Project. And the Manhattan Project was basically the development of a nuclear weapon, something so destructive that it could end a war at a moment's notice. And Roosevelt did not want to use this at all. Like, he was like, this is going to be the very, very, very last resort. Very, very last resort. I would like to keep my relationship with Joseph Stalin and have him help us. But the scientists on the Manhattan Project, led by Robert Oppenheimer, continued working on it anyway. All right, so now we're in 1944 and it's re-election time in the US. So along with managing all of the relationships internationally, Roosevelt also had to worry about getting re-elected and his campaign. Roosevelt's vice president at the time was a man named Henry Wallace, and Henry Wallace was probably the second most popular man in the US behind Roosevelt. He was very popular amongst the American public. Now, Henry Wallace was popular because he was a man of the people. He fought for the working class, he fought for civil rights, he fought for women's rights, like in the 1940s, you know? He was like really progressive for a white dude back then. He was the kind of leader who talked the talk and walked the walk. He would show up to these protests and stand with the people, like fight amongst the people in riots and chaos. Like, he was about that action. He was also anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism. He hated the British. He wanted to start a world revolution and help the people of the world kind of rise up and get back their rights. He was just a good dude. He was an all-American good dude. So Roosevelt was planning his re-election campaign, and he was fully intending on having Henry Wallace as his vice president again. However, other people in their party did not like Henry Wallace at all. And it was well-known knowledge that Roosevelt's health wasn't well. You know, he wasn't doing that well. I think it was one of those things that no one wanted to say, but everyone was thinking, like, what if he dies? Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh at that. Why would I laugh at that? What is wrong? Why would I laugh at that? People in the party who didn't like Henry Wallace were worried that Roosevelt's health would mean that Henry Wallace would be the president, right? Now, the issue was, in the Democratic Party at the time, there were a lot of really racist members. Most of the senators in the Democratic Party were from southern states, and they still believed in and profited from racism and the exploitation of poor black people. So someone like Henry Wallace, who was fighting for the rights of everyone, wasn't going to work. That wasn't going to work for them. Mainly a senator by the name of Jimmy Brines. He becomes the ringleader for trying to get Henry Wallace off the ticket. And Jimmy Brines was a real POS, okay? He was trash. Jimmy Brines was a senator out of South Carolina, where he was born and raised, and he was very racist. He believed in white superiority. He went out of his way to make sure that the anti-lynching bill of 1938 didn't get passed. He made certain that people could still get lynched. That's the kind of person Jimmy Brines was. Trash. Why are you so evil? I just don't understand why you would go out of your way to make sure that that didn't get passed. Like, it's just so not cool. He was just not cool. Not a cool bro. Had to put my hair up because it was getting hot in here. All right, so unfortunately, Jimmy Brines was very popular amongst the Democratic Party. He had a lot of political pull, if you will. Jimmy Brines was now, along with being senator, in charge of the War Mobilization Office. And during so, he realized how profitable war is, which is fantastic. Just another great thing to add to his already bitchin' personality. So Brines is basically the exact opposite of Henry Wallace. Like, they couldn't be further on the spectrum. Back to the fact that everyone is aware of Roosevelt's declining health. Jimmy Brines really doesn't want Henry Wallace to be the president because they're so opposite. So he gets together a group of Democrats to basically go to Roosevelt and give an ultimatum. And that's what they do. They go into Roosevelt's office and they say to him, listen, we love you, but you're not well, babe. You're not well. You need to take Henry Wallace off your ticket as vice president, or we're going to split up the Democratic Party. So basically they threatened him. They threatened him with an ultimatum to get rid of Henry, or they were going to start a war within the Democratic Party, which is crazy. Now Roosevelt is listening to this and he's like, wow, really? Wow. Wow. But of course he takes what they're saying seriously. He doesn't give them an answer then. He doesn't give in to their ultimatum at that time, but he's taking it seriously and he's really, really stressed out about this. He's dealing with war everywhere. You know, he's trying to stop the wars everywhere. He doesn't want a war in his own party. So he's thinking about it. He's thinking about it. He talks to Eleanor Roosevelt about it, goddess, and she says that she thinks that Henry should stay because Henry has the same values and, you know, beliefs that they do. He's a part of the team. Ultimately, Roosevelt decides that keeping Henry is not worth splitting up the party. He just doesn't want to deal with that right now. So he decides to remove Henry as vice president, but he doesn't pick someone else. He decides that he's going to let the Democratic National Convention decide who's going to be vice president. And Henry Wallace still had a really big shot because he was so popular. So Jimmy Brines and his little gang of Democrats who are just haters start hatching a plan on getting someone else on the ticket. They start pulling some strings and lurking in the shadows and bribing people in order to make sure that Henry Wallace isn't on the ticket. They also need to find his replacement. If Henry Wallace isn't going to be vice president, then who is? You know, who are they going to put in there? So they start looking around, putting together a list. They need someone who's not very popular, but also like, you know, doesn't have any enemies in the party. I think Brines really wanted someone that he could have political control over, like someone he could influence. So they're working really hard to make this plan, create this list, who's it gonna be, who's it gonna be? And finally, they decide on a senator from Missouri named Harry S. Truman. Up until this point, Harry Truman had been a pretty forgettable member of the party. He was very just kind of to himself, like, you know, didn't really make a name for himself. You know, he was a little guy just trucking along. And so they go to Harry and they're like, hey, do you want to be vice president? And he's like, yeah, I guess, sure. I don't know what he said. That's like such a big question, right? Like if someone's like, do you want to be the vice president? What do you say? I'd be like, probably not, but can I get back to you on that? I really don't know if I would have said yes. Like if someone came to me right now and asked me to be the vice president, I'd be like, Okay, so before we continue, we need to get in our time machine to find out who this Harry Truman is. Who is this man who is so eager to be the vice president? And he's not, like, are you qualified? Was he qualified to be the vice president? The answer is no. Let's put on our seatbelt and find out. We've gone from 1944 to 1884. On May 8th, 1884, a Taurus king is born, Harry S. Truman. Interestingly, the S doesn't stand for anything. Like, it's just S. His middle name is S, which is funny. Like, why? Harry was born in Lamar, Missouri, and he had a very odd childhood. Along with having an S for a middle name, which is very odd, his life was odd. His childhood was odd, in my opinion. Harry's father was a man named John Anderson, and he was a very small man. He would go around town punching people in the face to prove that he wasn't like a punk, I guess. I don't know. It was known around town that like John is gonna punch you. Like John was going around starting fights. And he encouraged Harry and his brothers to do the same thing. Now, Harry wasn't much of a fighter, so because he couldn't fight other people, his dad would fight him. So his dad would physically abuse him because he didn't physically abuse strangers, I guess. I don't know. I told you, it's odd. But it gets odder. Harry was diagnosed with flat eyeballs, so he had to wear these really thick Coke bottle glasses, and he was bullied a lot for this. Like, along with being short as well, like his dad, he had these thick glasses. And he also had objectively feminine features. I don't really know what that means, I guess. He just had like soft features, like features like a woman. But that's what everyone said, and they would bully him about it and call him a sissy. The only person that was like kind of nice to him was his mom, Martha Truman. Harry would go to his mom and like tell her like, they're bullying me, they're calling me sissy. And she would comfort him by saying, it's okay that they're calling you sissy because you were supposed to be a girl. You were supposed to be born a girl. It's odd. I told you guys it was odd. All of this made Harry develop a complex around his gender. So he struggled a lot with his gender his whole life, basically. He struggled a lot with feeling manly and macho, and so he would do things a lot of the time to exert his masculinity. As a young man, Harry decides that the masculine thing to do was to join the war, and so he does. He joins World War I, and he actually leaves decorated with honors. After the war, Harry returns to Missouri, and he's just kind of hanging out. He doesn't really, I don't really know what, like, it doesn't really say what he was doing or what he was about when he came back. Just vibing, I guess. By the time he was 39, he described himself as a very unsuccessful man. He just wasn't really doing much. He tried to start a few businesses that didn't really work out. He was currently working at a clothing store. I don't really know what he was about, but he said he was unsuccessful. So Harry decides that he wants to go to law school and get into politics, and so he does. He joins a law school, which I don't think he graduated. It doesn't say whether or not he graduated, but he also joins the Democratic Party, the Kansas City Democratic Organization. It's not really clear what he was doing there, but he joins, and again, I don't know. He was just vibing. Now, the Kansas City Democratic Organization was owned by a man, a very wealthy man named Tom Pendergast, and Tom liked to use his money and his political connections to influence the election. Roosevelt hated Tom Pendergast because he saw him as a threat to democracy, which technically he was. Like, Tom Pendergast was just mixing shit up, basically. He was just like, boom, boom, whatever, doing whatever I want because I can, because I'm rich as hell. In 1934, Tom decides that he wants to use his money to try and get someone in DC in the White House at some point. So Tom is going through the members of his organization, and he goes through 3 different people before he lands on Harry Truman. And he's like, do you want to be a senator? Do you want to be the senator of Missouri? And Harry Truman is like, yeah, sure, why not? I'm not really doing much else. Yeah, sure. So he does. He runs for senator of Missouri, and with the help of Tom Pendergast, he gets elected. If that's not a threat to democracy, I don't know what is. Like, a couple years ago, this guy was working in a clothing store, and now he's the senator. Once Harry got to DC, he was not welcomed really at all. Most of the senators there didn't like him or respect him because they felt like he hadn't really earned his position there, which technically he hadn't, right? But once he got the position, he did do his best to try and like keep it and stay there, and he did. He was senator from 1934 to 1944 when he's approached by Brines to be the vice president. All right, so now we're back in 1944. Brines asks Harry Truman if he wants to be vice president. He's like, sure. This isn't his first time that someone's asked him to take a position that maybe he's not that qualified for. Maybe he's not the best guy for the job, but he's the guy with the opportunity, right? So he's gonna take that opportunity. Yeah. I'll do it. I'll be vice president. I became a senator. How hard could it be, right? That's probably what he's thinking. I don't know. All right, so July of 1944 is the Democratic National Convention. And here is when they're going to vote on who's going to be the vice president. Now, Henry Wallace was aware of the fact that he was going to have to win this fair and square, and he was prepared to do that. He didn't know that there were forces working against him, that there was a whole orchestrated plan to make sure that he wasn't going to win. The convention begins, and a poll is taken. 65% of people there voted for Henry Wallace. They thought Henry Wallace was going to be the vice president, and 2% of the people there voted for Harry Truman. So he was on the board. When Henry Wallace physically arrived at the convention, he was receiving a lot of praise. Like, the crowd was going wild. They started chanting his name, Wallace, Wallace, Wallace. Like, it was very clear who everyone wanted to be the vice president, right? Henry Wallace gets on stage and gives a speech, and he talks about his plan to help continue working on workers' rights.
Equal wages for equal work, regardless of sex or race.
Very progressive stuff. Again, it was a good guy. He seemed like a good dude. I don't know. I don't know him, but it sounds like he should have been the president, but I don't know. So he's giving his speech, and the crowd starts chanting, "We want Wallace. We want Wallace. We want Wallace. Like, they really wanted Wallace, right? Didn't we all? For some reason, he wasn't yet nominated, so the way that it worked is someone had to go down to the podium and actually officially nominate the person. One of the senators is making his way down to the podium to nominate Henry Wallace, and all of a sudden, all the sound goes off. The sound is completely shut off, the microphones are shut off, and everyone starts freaking out. And this was Brines' plan. Shut off the sound, shut off the speaker, so if he can't get nominated, then he's not going to be an option. So once the sound was cut off, the entire Coliseum kind of just went into chaos. Like, everyone's like freaking out, like, what's going on? What's going on? And the chairman of the convention, a man named Samuel Jackson, says that he was worried that it was going to cause a fire hazard. So he moves to close the convention. He calls it to a close. No one else can be nominated. Now it's closed because we don't want more chaos to ensue. Later, the same guy, Samuel Jackson, would say that he was given strict instructions by Jimmy Brines not to allow Henry Wallace to be nominated. And it worked. Henry Wallace wasn't on the ticket, but guess who was? Harry S. Truman. And the S stands for nothing. So the election continues, and as a shock to no one, Roosevelt is elected again as president, and Harry Truman is his vice president. Well, Henry Wallace was, of course, disappointed by this, but he didn't know. Like, no one knew really the extent to which people had gone to make sure he wasn't on the ticket. So he expressed, you know, that he was upset by it, but he was going to stand behind the party and, of course, continue supporting Roosevelt and do everything that he could for the country because he was a good dude. Anywho, now the election is over, and Roosevelt is just happy that he can put it behind him and focus on the bigger problem here, right? We're still in a world war. In January of 1945, he's sworn in again as president and Harry Truman is vice president. And then he gets back to focusing on the real world issues, you know, maintaining his relationship with Stalin so everything can go as planned. He wanted Henry Wallace as his vice president. It didn't work out that way, but it's okay. The plan is still in motion. The scientists are still working on the Manhattan Project, you know, just chugging along. Everything's going great. It's fine. It's fine. This is fine. And then on April 12th, 1945, Roosevelt dies of a massive stroke. After 12 years in office and probably the most beloved modern president, the world was in shock and the country was very, very sad. He had really done a lot to improve the conditions for Americans, and he was doing his best to, you know, keep things together around the world. He was really working hard. To add to this tragedy, Vice President Harry Truman, who'd only been vice president for 82 days at this point, was now going to be the leader of the free world. He had been in the position that he wasn't qualified for 82 days, and now he was getting a promotion. Yikes. Yikes. That's all I can say to that is yikes. 82 days. There was no question that Harry Truman was not qualified for any of this. He wasn't qualified for any of it, but he especially wasn't qualified to be president of the United States. And once sworn in, a reporter says to him, "Congratulations," or "Good luck, Mr. President," to which he famously responds, "I really wish you didn't have to call me that." That sounds so stressful. But also, why did he agree to be the vice president? Why did he do that? Honestly, I think maybe it was because maybe he didn't know that Roosevelt was sick. Like, I feel like Roosevelt might have been keeping his health a secret from many people, but I don't know. I'm not sure. Still, if you know you're not qualified to be the vice president, why would you do that? Why would he say yes to being a senator? Now look, like, what a life. He went from working at a clothing store and calling himself unsuccessful to years later being the president. He went from working at a clothing store to being the president. Now, because Harry didn't have much experience, he relied very heavily on the advisement of Jimmy Brines, which is exactly what Jimmy Brines wanted. A lot of really bad actors came in and started influencing Truman and his decisions because he was clueless. Like, he didn't know what he was doing at all. People who had worked with Roosevelt prior to meeting Truman described Truman, after they met him, they described him as a diligent and honest mediocrity, which is cold. That is so cold. A diligent mediocrity, damn. All right, so makeup's done. I just need some lip gloss. I went and like bumped my hair a bit, but the story's not done. So Truman's in office and he's getting briefed on all of these top secret things or just highly classified things that before he wouldn't have any reason to know any of these things because he was just a senator from Missouri. You know, but now he's the president, so he has a lot of catching up to do. He gets caught up on the fact that the US is supposed to help the Soviet Union, also known as the Yalta Agreement, and he doesn't agree with this. Mainly because he doesn't want to support the Soviet Union, because Jimmy Brines doesn't want to support the Soviet Union. because he's just his puppet at this point. Brines also tells Truman about the Manhattan Project and the secret weapon they're working on, and he says that instead of working with the Soviet Union, we could just use this to end the war, and then America will be number one. On April 23rd, 1945, Truman has a meeting scheduled with the Russian Prime Minister, and this is just 11 days after Roosevelt's death. The Russian Prime Minister is coming on behalf of Stalin just to, like, you know, see if everything is still happening, see if we're all on the same page still, you know, and we're not. He leaves the meeting very upset. He says that he's never been spoken to the way that Truman spoke to him, and Truman basically just said, like, we're not working with you, we're not dealing with you, like, we don't have to deal with you, basically. Just really, really disrespectful and mean for no reason. He starts accusing Stalin of things and, like, accusing the Soviet Union of things, and just a bunch of nonsense, truly, because he has no idea what the deal was. Like, he just found out. And it was clear to the Prime Minister that he just wanted to dominate the conversation, and he had no interest in actually being an ally like Roosevelt was. He says that he left the meeting so upset. He says he's never been spoken to that way by anyone ever, and he doesn't understand why Truman was so disrespectful towards him. And Truman left the meeting saying, like, yeah, I really let him have it. I showed him who was boss. Like, okay, bud, relax. Now, based on the documentary that I watched, the narrator thinks that Harry Truman was trying to make up for the fact that he had been not so manly or not so masculine. Like, apparently he had continued to deal with his gender identity well into adulthood. So now that he was president and he was uncertain of himself, he was overexerting his masculine macho-ness, if that makes sense. So basically, world peace and everything that Roosevelt had worked so hard for was going up in flames because of Truman's ego. Yep. 6 days later, on April 29th, 1945, the Germans officially surrendered, so Stalin had been successful, and he had heard about how Truman treated his ambassador, and he was upset about it, but he still really wanted to go forward with the plan because the Soviet Union had lost so much during the war, and America was going to help them restore some of the stuff that they lost. After the conclusion of the European War, the world leaders got together for what they would call the Potsdam Summit, and this was to, you know, just kind of regroup and figure out what was going on, like what they were going to do. The summit was supposed to happen in June of 1945, but Truman pushed it back to July because he wanted the Manhattan Project to be finished so that he would have leverage over Stalin. Stalin was going into the summit still wanting to work with the US, like still continuing with the plan. June 16th, 1945, they tested the first bomb, and it did really well. It did exceedingly well, you know. Robert Oppenheimer, the creator, says he was terrified at how well the bomb performed, but Harry Truman was thrilled. He was like, perfect, great, now we can do the summit. Now let's get to that summit. Now we got our leverage. We got a bomb that can kill thousands instantly. Let's get to that summit. Oppenheimer is like, I don't know about this, dude. And Truman's like, I do. I know. We're doing it. We're doing it. Let's go. So the summit begins and Truman walks in there. He's very confident. He's like on top of the world. To everyone's surprise, when the summit started, the Soviet Union had actually received a telegram from Japan saying that they wanted to surrender as long as their emperor could live. So when Germany was officially defeated, Hitler committed suicide, but the emperor of Japan at the time was also kind of revered as a god amongst the people. Like, they looked at the emperor as like Jesus. So like, if he would have died, then the entire country would have been very demoralized. They announced this at the summit and everyone's like, great, fantastic. Like, now we don't have to figure out a plan to do anything because they're going to surrender. So like, it's fine, you know, whatever. But Harry Truman is like, no, that's not good enough. Roosevelt said he wanted unconditional surrender. And in that, he really wanted to make sure that the ideals of the militaries at that time didn't live on amongst the people. And Truman thought that meant, oh, well, the emperor has to die. Several of Truman's advisors wanted him to modify the unconditional surrender just because it would be easier that way. It would be easier to end the war. It'd be easier to just, you know, get things done with. But they didn't know what Truman had planned. They didn't know what Truman had under his belt. Truman didn't even know what Truman had under his belt. What a freak. And of course, the whole time he's being encouraged by Brines not to accept the surrender. He's like, no, you can't do that. You can't. Don't accept it. Don't accept it. We got the bomb now. America's going to be number one. Just a mess. Like, I can't. I'm sorry, you guys. I'm sorry if I'm making this like more comical than it needs to be, but that's the only way I can cope because it's so preposterous that this actually happened. Allegedly, maybe. I wasn't there. So the 4th day of the summit, everyone's like, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? Should we just, you know, accept the surrender? And Truman's like, no. And he announces that America has finished the first nuclear weapon. They have the atomic bomb, and they plan to use it on Japan to finish the war once and for all. And everyone is shocked. They're like, are you for real? They're like, why would you do that, bro? Why? Why are you like this? Truman makes the declaration that they're going to drop the bomb in August, and they're no longer working with Stalin or the Soviet Union. They're not going to provide the aid that Roosevelt promised. This was it. This was how the war was going to end. Now, and that's the final word. Many people did not understand why he was so adamant about using the bomb, especially because the Soviet Union has still offered to help. And everyone just felt like it was just really unreasonable, right? Like it just seemed like just a bit rash, babe. Like it's just too extreme, right? But he had gotten too caught up. He was listening to Brines. He was also kind of racist. Like Truman was racist, and he didn't really see the Japanese people as people. He kind of saw them as less than. So to him, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to be blowing up a bunch of people, right? With the deadliest weapon known to mankind. That's not what he was thinking. I don't know what the fuck he was thinking. Bless him. On August 6th, the first bomb was dropped in Hiroshima, and the second bomb was dropped in Nagasaki. The second bomb reportedly killed 40,000 people instantly, of which only 250 of them were actual soldiers. It's really, really terrible. Like, really. Like, those people had nothing to do with any of it, honestly. Truly. And I'm not sure if the bombs killed the emperor. I'm not sure. And to this day, the population still suffer from the lasting effects of radiation. Like decades later, they're still being affected by this. I'm not sure that Truman really knew the lasting effects. He probably didn't, because he literally 2 months after Oppenheimer had finished it, he wanted to use it. Like he had no idea how impactful this would actually be. What a joke. And he wasn't even supposed to be the president. He wasn't supposed to be the vice president. He wasn't supposed to be a senator. Apparently, according to his mom, he was supposed to be a girl. That wasn't okay. That might have been a little too far, Cyd. It might have been a little too far. But you know what? So is dropping an atomic bomb. That's far as well. Jeez. Alright, you guys. That's it for this video. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. I told you it was a mess. I told you it was a mess. I told you it was messy. I can't. It's really hard to process, actually. Like, the second time saying it, like, going through it, it's a hard thing to, like, really wrap my brain around. He was not supposed to be the president. Imagine if Henry Wallace was the president. Imagine. I don't think Henry Wallace would have dropped that bomb. I don't think he would have thought that was necessary. Really. I don't know why Harry Truman thought that was necessary. Probably because it, you know, just started the war machine in America, and that's a lot of profit, I guess. I don't know. I don't really know what's going on, you guys. I don't watch the news anymore. I'm a lot happier for it, but I thought this was a fascinating story enough to tell you guys again. So please let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'm gonna turn off these lights now because it's really hot. And go watch some Real Housewives. I love you so, so much, and I'll see you in my next video. Oh, stick around, watch some other videos, subscribe, don't be fake. Love you guys. All right, see ya.